In October of 2019, the most important geopolitical basketball game in the history of the world was played in Shanghai, China. It was an exhibition game featuring LeBron James and the Los Angeles Lakers. Right before the game, an NBA executive, that's the National Basketball Association, an NBA executive tweeted his support for the Hong Kong protesters who are fighting for freedom and liberty to separate themselves from the authoritarian government of mainland China. The people of China, though, were enraged by this tweet and demanded that the NBA apologize. The NBA refused to apologize, saying that this is America and we believe in free speech. Our executives can say anything they want. The Chinese people then decided not only to boycott the game in Shanghai, but to completely boycott the NBA. It's really nice to believe in free speech, but it's really stupid to piss off 1 billion customers. LeBron James himself, who has traveled extensively in Hong Kong and China, came out and said that he believes that the NBA has no idea what's really going on in Hong Kong. And LeBron was lambasted by the American mainstream media, who claimed that LeBron James was refusing to stand up for liberty and free speech. Of course, when other black athletes, such as Colin Kaepernick, exercised his right of free speech and refused to stand for the national anthem, he was blacklisted from his profession. So in America, it's really great. You can have free speech as long as it's the correct free speech. The American mainstream media claims that the people of China have no idea what's actually going on in Hong Kong because all they get is censored news from their authoritarian government. Actually, the people of China know a lot more about their history than we Americans know about our history because what we get is censored news. But the people of China, for instance, know about the 100 years of humiliation. From the middle of the 1800s up until 1949, all the Western powers, including the United States, tried to carve up China and turn it into an impoverished colony of the West, much like they did to much of the rest of the world. The British Empire actually was forcing opium on the Chinese people. When the Chinese people tried to stop them from sending opium into China, the British Empire attacked China in the Opium Wars, forced them to take opium, and at that same time, the British Empire stole the very important Chinese port city of Hong Kong. And it wasn't until 1997, the British Empire had shrunk back to being this little tiny island called England. China had risen back up to being the very powerful country it had been for thousands of years. The Chinese forced the British to return Hong Kong to China. So for Chinese people to see young protesters on the streets of Hong Kong waving British and American flags is an incredible insult. And the Chinese people know with incredible amounts of proof that the CIA is actually instigating these protests in Hong Kong. The American mainstream media answers that by saying, "That's a conspiracy theory. That's a conspiracy theory." And the way they're able to get away with that is because, like I said before, we Americans don't know anything about our own history because what we get is censored news. The CIA and the United States military has actually overthrown 80 governments since World War II. Many of those governments were democracies, and they were replaced, many of them, with quite brutal fascist dictatorships. So the idea that the CIA is trying to instigate protests that will carve Hong Kong off from China and bring it in as a client state of the American empire is not a conspiracy theory. And what we got here in our mainstream media for a year of these protests was one-sided coverage. Night after night on American TV and news, they would show the Hong Kong protesters whining, "Oh my God, the Hong Kong police are brutalizing us." Actually, in 1 year of those protests, the Hong Kong police killed no one. And these were not peaceful protests. They were an insurrection. People were throwing Molotov cocktails at police. Compare that with the recent Black Lives Matter protests in the United States, which were peaceful. The police actually killed about a dozen protesters in a week. Imagine if the Black Lives Matter protesters were throwing Molotov cocktails at police. There probably would have been hundreds of black men lying dead on the street. The Hong Kong police killed no one. Let's go back to the exhibition game in Shanghai. Outside of the arena that night, thousands of Chinese protesters were surrounding the arena and chanting Chinese nationalist songs. But the Chinese are such avid basketball fans. A lot of people just wanted to see LeBron James play. This would be the one chance in their life, maybe, they would get to see LeBron play live, not just on TV. So a lot of people went in and watched the game. But inside the arena, there was only one chant that was going on the entire night. Every time LeBron James would come to the foul line to shoot free throws, the entire arena would erupt into the initials that stand for most valuable player. MVP, MVP, MVP.